Subcommittee. Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I will commence with roll call of everyone present. Commissioner Jeff Good.
Present.
Councilmember Sylvia Graham.
Present.
Councilmember Mike Jessen.
Here.
Citizen appointees James Hazard
Here.
and Curtis Streidelmeyer.
Here.
Okay, and non-voting member County Engineer Mike Novotny.
Present.
And we did have our other technical advisor, Scott McClure. He's going to probably be joining us, and I'm Vicki Urbanik, Porter County Auditor. Given that this is the first meeting of the Infrastructure and Facility Subcommittee, the structure of the meeting is going to be very similar to the other first meetings of the other subcommittees in that this is largely an organizational meeting that's going to set the stage for the work that they're going to be doing in the coming weeks. And accordingly, the first item of business is to select a chair of the subcommittee. So can I have a motion to select a chair of your committee?
I'd like to nominate Jeff Good to be the chairman.
Second the motion.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Are there any other nominations? Going once, going twice. Okay, so let's take a vote to name Jeff Good the chair of the subcommittee. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed. Okay, Chairman Good, you are in.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. So now we're going to get into review of guidance from the steering committee. So we'll turn that back over to you.
Okay, very good. On March 10th, the steering committee held its first meeting, and this was an organizational meeting to set the ground rules and to give some guidance to all of the subcommittees. So I'm just going to touch on some of the points that the steering committee would like you and the other subcommittees to follow. I believe that you all received this in an email, but you do have hard copies in front of you as well. So I'm just going to touch on some of the main points. One is that the steering committee would really like the subcommittees to stick to the timetable that was initially mentioned by the county commissioners. And that timetable generally calls for your subcommittees to be meeting now and through May, and to come up with your recommended projects and to present your projects to the steering committee. The steering committee will then have meetings, take public input, and finalize their plan to be presented to the commissioners and to the county council. And the hope is that, or the anticipation is that the county commissioners will adopt the plan in August, and the county council will appropriate the appropriations that will be required also in August. And there's some benefits to this timetable, one of which is that the bulk of this work gets done prior to the start of the county's budget hearing process. So that is the goal and the hope. Also, the steering committee would like each subcommittee to set a time aside to hear public input at the end of each meeting. And you're free to limit public comment to, they suggested something like 3 minutes. And they do want the subcommittees to rank all of your proposals. So to give a priority considerations to all of the proposals that you are recommending. And also, the steering committee adopted what's called general priority considerations. These are, as the name implies, these are what are going to give the steering committee preferential treatment, if you will. Now, it doesn't mean that every applicant, every project has to meet every single one of these bullet points exactly. Some of them might not be relevant, but they're just saying that they would like the top projects to meet most of these priority considerations. And they are, they include that they're an allowable use of the ARPA funds. That to me is sort of a no-brainer. That they're one-time, that there's matching funds that are leveraged to the extent possible. Some projects may not really need matching funds. They serve a large number of people in Porter County or the target population served. They're from agencies or organizations located in Porter County. They're an effective and impactful use of the county's ARPA allocation. And very importantly, that all projects are able to obligate the funds by sometime in 2024. And obligate means that there's a contract. There's an obligation to pay this money. It's a legal obligation. And that's because if we don't obligate the funds, we, the county, by the end of 2024, the money does have to be returned to the U.S. Treasury. Now, we do have through 2026 to actually spend it, because sometimes these projects might take a while, you know. But we need to obligate the funds by, the county needs to, by the end of 2024. And when our attorney comes, he may address another consideration that the subcommittees should try to move that timetable up a bit for all of their projects. And he can address that. So that basically is, in a nutshell, what the steering committee would like you to follow. Also, I should mention, you are more than free to impose additional, priorities or additional requirements. This is just the general priority considerations. And that's it from the steering committee.
Any questions from the group, just initially, that they may have? I know it's going to take a while to wrap your minds around it a little bit, but I think from my perspective, the biggest thing is, do these projects qualify? And that's what I would like to get to in the beginning, because we have more money asks than we have money
Yes.
allowed.
Yes.
And we've got to figure out a way to sort of cull the herd here right off the top, because I'm assuming that some of these probably don't qualify just based on what I'm looking at. But we'd have to get into the details. There's probably going to be legal opinions given and all that other stuff. But I know from my perspective, since these are projects that are, a lot of these projects are pretty costly, I just think we need to make sure that we're looking at all these at the proper way from a qualification standpoint. And then I think the other question I would have is, what are going to be the matching dollars on some of these? Because some of these are outside institutions of the government, and they're sort of quasi-type political subdivisions or whatever. And I just, we have some areas in the county that haven't invested in some of this. So I'd like to see, obviously we want to see all boats rise, but in the same breath, we need to make sure that everybody's putting money in as well too, so we have some stakeholder money in the project as well too. So I think that is just a good practice, because that sets up for, a lot of these systems we're putting in are going to require maintenance. So as we know, right, and that we want to make sure that they have stake in the game too, that they maintain this stuff after they put it in. So, so I think those are from the thoughts and the thinking that I've done on this to this point. Those are probably a couple of my bigger issues that I wanted to talk about in the beginning, and let everybody start pondering it and thinking about it and going from there. So, any other questions or?
I guess to that point, I mean, Vicki, from your perspective, are there proposals here that do not qualify?
Can I address that in the next section?
Yeah, that's fine.
Final rule?
We're probably jumping on it, and I apologize. We'll get back to the final.
But to get to the answer, I do have questions.
Okay.
But you'll see why I'm not going to say no at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I
It's early.
have questions that I think the applicants will need to explain.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Well, then
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
one question, and maybe this is for Madam Auditor, but in terms of, I know we're looking at these specific subset of applications, infrastructure and facilities, but for information for the committee here, I don't know if everyone's aware of how many applications in total and what the total ask was and sort of the total dollar value that we have available.
Okay, there were 63 total applications. Now, some groups submitted multiple applications, so that's not 63 individual entities, but 63 proposals. And the total ask was about $53 million.
Okay.
Yeah, I can.
Plus or minus, yeah,
Yes,
plus or
more-
minus.
More.
A little bit over.
More than we have available.
A little bit more than we have.
Unless you
$20
can
million?
persuade U.S. Congress to
Just keep it going.
give us more money.
Well, hopefully it won't take 5 times to figure out how they're going to use the money before if they give us more. So that took over a year to figure out, so, and it's still not figured out,
There may be more.
Still questions.
federal government. Okay, next up, we have a review of the final rule. So we're going to turn it over to you again here,
Yes,
Madam
This
Auditor.
is my favorite part. Okay. Okay, let's go over here. Some of you, I know you have seen this before. If you don't mind, I'm going to stand because I just can't. What's on the screen right now are the 4 main expenditure categories in the final rule. The final rule is the set of rules that were released by U.S. Treasury on January 6th of this year. This is my copy of the final rule with some other supporting compliance documentation. So there's a lot there, okay? Each of these expenditure categories has their own set of parameters and restrictions. So you can't just say that the same rules apply to each one, okay? So they're listed in order from the most flexible in terms of what the money can be used for to the most restrictive. Now, I'm going to focus right now on the second one, public health and negative economic impacts. We have 4 subcommittees that have been established in our county, and all 4 of them are going to be addressing projects that fall under this category, including you. But obviously, you're also going to be dealing with the category that's called investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So your projects that have been assigned to this committee are really going to be straddling these 2 different areas of the final rule. Now, really briefly, and we can get into it, and we will be getting into it further. Under the public health and negative economic impacts category, it's broken down into 8 subcategories. You do not need to even really look at assistance to nonprofits, small businesses, and to a certain extent, impacted industries, including tourism. Those follow a different set of parameters. But there's other parts of the public health expenditure category that deal, well, let's say, COVID-19 mitigation and prevention. So let's say that we have a building project that wants to open up some space for social distancing. Oh, excuse me. That would fall under that subcategory. I only bring this up because when you recommend a project and it's ultimately approved by the steering committee, then the commissioners, then the council, when there's actual spending that goes on, I have to report what was spent, and I have to report the detail category to U.S. Treasury. It's not under those 4 big categories. It's broken down into a lot more detail. So that's why I'm really focused on what category does this project fit into. Now, let's move real briefly to the, you could see, this is the slide that I gave to a different presentation that breaks down some of these expenditure subcategories under the public health and negative economic impact category into some more details. There's a list of allowable uses in the final rule, and it's called enumerated uses. And so we can identify what project might be allowable just by looking into the final rule, and if it's enumerated, then we have a pretty good assurance that we're in compliance. Let's briefly look at the infrastructure category, because the commissioners, when they set up these subcategories, they assign certain topics to each of your committees, and you were given not just facilities, but you were also given any projects that might fall under this special expenditure category in the final rule, which is water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. I can tell you, you're not dealing with any broadband projects, but you are mainly dealing with water, and I believe one would qualify for a sewer project. So we will go over what's allowed and what's not allowed under the final rule in the water projects. This is considered the most restrictive because it's really restricted to these water and sewer projects, but within that category, there's a really long list. Basically, projects that are allowed, and I know that Mike can talk about this a lot better than me, projects that are allowed under the federal clean water and drinking water sinking funds, those are allowable uses under this particular final rule. Stormwater projects, wetland restoration projects, shoreline restoration projects. There's also projects dealing with water conservation. Even rain barrels is a allowable use. So there's a lot there, and when we get into the details of this particular rule, we can go over what's allowable and not. I will say that most of the projects that you're given in this category are under the water project area, and most of them deal with water conservation or stormwater, both of which are allowable uses.
Yeah, Vicki, is it determined clear in writing when you start getting into other political subdivisions and things like that?
In terms of allowing, yes, the final rule does allow the county government to, in a sense, transfer or share its ARPA monies with other governmental units. And there's another way of doing it where you can basically say, we want this project, but we want this group to carry it out on our behalf. In that case, it's considered a sub-award, and that other entity is going to be considered a sub-recipient. It's still our project. We are still completely responsible for the money, and we still have to track everything. It's just that we want this other group to carry it out on our behalf. The commissioners have gotten into these types of awards with some other, nonprofit groups.
But at the end of the day, the county's on the hook if the money's not spent, right?
Yes.
So we're going to have to make sure that if we go outside our political subdivision,
Yes.
that there's agreements and commitments that
Yes.
carry on and they indemnify themselves for non-performance.
Yes.
Because we've had a history
Right.
of that in this county too, of non-performance, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because whether we're dealing with direct grants assistance, just direct assistance, or we're approaching this as another group is going to be a subrecipient, there will be a written agreement between the county and that outside group for everyone. Now, we already have a written agreement written up. It is largely modeled after some other written agreements, and it has been reviewed by our county attorney. And so this is a sub-recipient agreement, and you're going to start seeing some work on that. That is going to be put into place first and foremost with the township trustees. I'm talking about one of the other projects that have already been approved by the county. So there will be a written agreement that's going to spell out exactly what the money is going to be used for, as well as the terms. How are we going to get the money to this outside group? And we are not just writing a check and say, go for it. We're not going to do that, because we have to document everything.
Yeah.
So,
Was that something that you'd be able to do on like a reimbursement type basis?
well, that is one option. The final rule says that the U.S. Treasury has no position on how you get the money to them, and they mentioned whether it's advance or reimbursement. My preference is direct invoicing. We treat outside groups, just like a county department. Mike can address, he knows how this works. When he needs a bill paid, they submit the invoice to the auditor's office and supporting documentation. We never pay bills without any supporting documentation. We want the invoice. We want to know what that money's going to. That's how I would like it to be, so that any outside group, if they have a contractor and the contractor bills, send us the invoice and the AP voucher. You have to fill it out, just like a county department does. We will review it, and we'll say, this looks kind of fishy, or this looks totally appropriate, and then we will pay it. We have complete control of it. Now, in some cases, that might not work. Let me just give an example. I don't know if any of these really affect you, but let's say an outside group wants to hire somebody with our allocation. We're not going to pay that person. They're not going to become a county employee. In that case, maybe an advance makes the most sense. However, we would only advance on a quarterly basis, and they have to give us their payroll reports to show that the money was spent properly, or else they don't get the advancement. But I prefer in order, direct invoicing, reimbursement, and then advancements.
Okay.
Now, reimbursement, the reality is that some other entities may not have that amount of money just sitting around to pay something and then to get reimbursed. But I like reimbursement because then we could see all the documentation. We're not on the hook until we see.
I would also add to this requirement for this committee, and we can talk about it as a group, but there has to be an approval process too of that fund, because if there was work that was done, we need to inspect that work too. Even though because it's part of it's what you do when you go for, you go build a building, you give your draw to the bank, and then they send an architect out or an engineer out, and they say, you did this right, you did this right, you did this wrong, you need to fix this, or you're not going to get your money till this is fixed. And I don't think that we need to add that step in there, because at the end of the day, we're going to be accountable for that money. So if we're accountable for the money, we should be accountable for the work and the sign off of that work too.
Well,
With our staff and our people.
Above and beyond that, right? I mean, not to throw contractors on the bus, under the bus, but contractors will cut corners
Yep.
to maximize profit on a project. So that's part of the observation process, is to make sure the work is getting done how it's supposed to be done. And if these are county funds that are being invested around the county, we better make sure that that project's built right, so that that investment lasts the full 50 or 75 or 100 year, whatever the design life cycle is.
And this is nothing here, folks, that we're adding because it's an ARPA process. These are best practices we're using in the
Correct.
stormwater department right now. And we started the department with those best practices. So we have our own engineers that work for us out there looking at this and approving it and making sure that it's all going in correctly. So I just want to make sure we have that step in this process to hold people accountable and catch it at the right time.
Right, that's, and what you're talking about is really different from the other subcommittees. You are dealing with building, construction, bricks and mortar, even drainage projects and water projects. Those are, those are actual building. It's not the same as, let's buy some PPE, or let's
Right.
give a grant to a nonprofit because they need it. It's a different set of rules, or a different mindset, a different attitude. Now, let me get to the question. How do we know if something's allowable or not? I'm often asked this question: can we use our money for XYZ? And the answer is almost always yes, or possibly. Okay, so this is where it's going to get a little bit dicey here. If I can say, yes, this is an enumerated use, that means that I can look in the final rule and I can pinpoint exactly where this is allowed. But there may be some projects that come before you that really are not an enumerated use, but it could be argued that this use applies to that project. because some of these enumerated uses are considered pretty broad. Let's go into one of the other categories. Support for children's mental and behavioral health. That's a pretty broad enumerated use. So you could have a project, and this doesn't affect you, so
Right,
I'm
it's
feeling
another
good
committee.
talking about it.
Yeah.
You could have a project that deals with something that helps children coping skills, an anti-bullying project at school. And that group can argue it fits under that enumerated use. And this is where it comes into your interpretation, your evaluation. Now, there may be some projects that really seem like a stretch. And what happens when something's a stretch? Well, there's a few things that could happen. We could ask the applicant, please explain this. You need to prove to us why you think it's in compliance. And then it's really up to you, the county officials and me, to all weigh in and say, we don't think that this is going to survive. We don't think this is going to pass muster, because at the end of the day, everything that is spent will come under audit. It won't come under audit this year. It will probably be next year or the following year, whenever the expenditure happens. So there are some uses, though, that may seem such a stretch that they're not in compliance. And does that mean that they're not allowed? Well, not exactly, because back in May, right after ARPA was signed into law, U.S. Treasury released what's called the interim final rule. And then they put it out for public comment. And they received more than 1,500 public comments from governments all throughout the country. And one of the big requests was, this is too restrictive. We want more flexibility. Give us more flexibility. Well, U.S. Treasury gave us flexibility. And with respect to is something allowable or not, you will find in the final rule. Here's the enumerated uses, but this list is non-exhaustive. Governments have the ability to identify other uses beyond those that are enumerated. So where does that leave us? How do we know if it's allowed or not? Well, we have to follow a framework, and we have to justify whether we think a project is in compliance or not. Now we're getting into, I may think it's allowable, you may think, no, it's not. So bottom line is this a project that you think is a good investment of our federal grant? And are you willing to come up with this justification and then defend it under audit? I'm not saying you personally, but us, the county. Because if there are any iffy projects, that's what we're going to have to do. Let's say there's an iffy project, I say, I don't think this complies, but you really want to do it. Well, we could try to come up with a justification. We can try to do that. Now, if we think it still isn't going to fall, there is that one expenditure category called revenue loss that is very, very flexible, and it is open for general government expenditures. But how much to dip into that will ultimately be up to the commissioners and the county council. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. So if there is something that seems like completely dead on arrival, as long as it meets the general government service provision, you could throw it in revenue loss. So that's why I can't.
Is that the 10 million?
Correct, yes. So that's why I can't really tell you that nothing is prohibited. There are some uses that are completely prohibited. We can't put this money in a rainy day fund.
Can't pave.
Pension, correct?
Can't
Generally
pave.
speaking, unless you put it in the revenue loss category. Yes. Unless it's with a stormwater project that is replacing culverts and you need to tear up a road, then you can rebuild the road. There are some exceptions, but you're right, roads are not there. Yeah. There's another pending proposal in
Yeah, we're
Congress.
scrambling on that one now as we speak, so, the infrastructure one.
Should probably hold back some money for when it comes.
So
Don't do
Vicki,
that.
kind of to that point, when you talk about, trying to explain and or justify or fit into a category, and if it doesn't fit into the category, you throw it under the $10 million threshold. if, it might be helpful for the subcommittees, for you, if you think there are proposals that most certainly need more explanation slash justification,
Yes.
that'd be important for the committees to know and also for the organizations to know.
Correct.
And so I assume that's part of what you intend to do.
Yes, oh, absolutely, yes.
So they'll know prior to the presentation that you're iffy, you need more justification to make you feel comfortable about
At
it.
this, the steering committee gave me the authorization to put a kibosh on any project that clearly is not compliant. But it's hard to do that,
And we haven't had one yet.
uh,
Have you kiboshed anything?
no, because.
We're just getting started,
of-
the committees.
Because if the county really wants that project, there probably could be an argument made. Not that I would agree with it, but the devil's in the details, right? So there are some projects that I will say are very, very iffy in my mind. But could the county put that under the revenue loss category? So that's why I can't in good conscience tell you right now, nothing. Now, if there's a proposal, we want to invest this and we want to put it in the rainy day fund, I would say that's absolutely not allowed. And I can show you where. But there are no proposals like that.
But really, till we get through the committees a lot more, we're not gonna know whether we have the 10 million to spend at all.
Correct.
Because right now, we're 20 million over in asks for what we have. So right now, the 10 million isn't even figured into what we got going on today.
No, except for, and I have shared this with the steering committee, and I think other people, the Marquette Trail, we believe that part of it is going to be used as a match for federal dollars. And we will have to dip into some of the revenue loss. Exactly how much, we don't know because
It's not final yet.
it's not,
You're
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Huh,
But
okay.
that's ultimately the county's decision if you're going to dip into revenue loss.
Okay.
What I'm seeing from some other entities is that they give premium pay and then the rest goes to revenue loss. There are some counties that have used their whole allocation under revenue loss because they've received less than 10 million. We are receiving more than 10 million, so.
So those people that had 10 million or less, they didn't have to go through the process or
They
anything either.
did not have
They
to.
don't, they're not qualified to go through ARPA then, like what we are.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
They
just
still
wanna
have to
make sure.
follow the reporting guidance, but the revenue loss reporting is not anywhere near,
Okay. It's stringent.
it's not as stringent,
Yeah.
yes.
But we got to work through the process to see if we even have 10 million left.
Yes, and one other thing that I'll say, but briefly, when there is a capital project, when there is a building project that exceeds $1 million, we are required to go through an additional analysis under the final rule.
Oh.
The final rule spells out what we have to do as a county.
Yep.
We have to evaluate alternatives and, but it's a process just to justify spending money on building projects. And so that is what your committee will be dealing with. Again, the list that is before you are the projects that have been assigned to your committee. I can sit down now because I'm not really doing a PowerPoint anymore. This is not a perfect science to decide applications in terms of which committee is the best. We had a discussion about this at this morning's meeting, was in terms of why a subcommittee received a certain project. Basically, if there was a building project of some sort, it's coming to you. The one exception dealt with a building project with the health department that was viewed as more county COVID response that was given to the county COVID committee, of which there are 2 members here. So you probably, things are gonna start getting blurry, I think. Now, of the building projects, it's going to be pretty interesting because not that you really care about this, but the first 2 and the 5th on your list, those are related to tourism. So I would put it in impacted industry, including tourism, but the county commissioners wanted building projects to be viewed by this committee. And it does make sense, because these are county building projects, and I think Commissioner Good mentioned it. You can build it now, but then there might be maintenance down the road that you will be seeing. So those are the projects that have been assigned to your committee. There is one that is shaded, and this comes from another governmental entity. And we really didn't have a happy home for other governmental projects. Where do they go? So again, I looked at what is being proposed, and it's a building project. And that's why it's coming to your committee. Now, the second set of projects all fall under what would be called water projects under the final rule. And all of them, like I said, with I think one or two exceptions, no, maybe all of them, deal with actual water projects, like stormwater, like water piping projects, wetland conservation projects.
So for clarity, the one that's Pleasant Township trustee, that's actually COUT's funding that they've asked us to help support? Is that why it's highlighted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I question that, because there was money given to the trustees in the initial, it's already been approved.
Yes.
And they've already gotten money, and so now they're coming back to the trough again?
Double dipping.
Yeah, okay,
And municipality also received money,
yeah,
right?
yeah, the town of Couts did too,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
And the only reason why it counts is that's the location of the pool, but this is
Yeah.
from the township. Yes. Now, that township funding was from, in the area of assistance to households. So does this qualify? So could they use their township funding for this? That's
I don't
an
know.
issue, but I can
But
tell
they have a
you-
pool now.
I can tell
They're using
you-
it for funding now, so,
Yeah.
and have been for 40 years, so it's been there for a long time.
Yeah, but the amount that's given to Pleasant Township trustee is less than what they're asking.
Yeah, but they also have a revenue component with the pool too. There's a revenue component, just like the Memorial Opera House, the animal shelter, there's revenue components with them as well too. They're taking in revenue for the pool and passes and other things. So I just wanted to, that was my question about that, and I see where you're going. Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the group? Keep them coming.
I think one of the kind of a general question is, as we look at the nonprofit subcommittee, and I think part of their requirement is to validate or verify that they have lost revenue due to the pandemic. In this particular case for infrastructure, it's not required.
Correct.
So as I look at some of these other non-county organizations, I mean, a question that just immediately comes to my mind is, what's the best way to determine what their financial needs are, their financial condition is, to determine whether or not this money should help this or that particular organization? I mean, how will they validate or validate their need in terms of their request?
That is something that you could ask them as part of if you're going to allow presentations, if you're going to have questions. And
Well, I'll jump the gun right here. I mean, I'm looking at recycling and waste reduction. That's a government entity for Porter County. They're asking for $1 million. They're sitting on about $1.5 million in the bank right now, and they want to build a new recycling center. They don't even have land for it yet, and they're sitting on over $1.5 million, and they're asking for $1 million here.
And they have a tax base.
And they have a tax base on, thank you, Sylvia, you're right, thank you, thank you. They have a tax base too, so, I mean, just, you don't even have ground purchased yet to do a center, and I don't know, it just seems a little out there to me, but that's the type of thing I think that Mike referred to is, what are some of the financial situations of some of these entities to where they did show a hardship? Because, at the end of the day, whether it's part of the infrastructure committee or not, this is all about hardship, and it should be looked at, across the whole path. I mean, that's how we got to here. So I'm just throwing that out there. And I know from my perspective, that's what I'm going to be looking at from that perspective. Scott, did you have something? You raised your hand.
Excuse me.
In every committee, I'm reminding, and I think in this committee, it's really important. This morning's meeting, it was a little less jugular because of the type of request, but in this committee especially, the deadline to have this money obligated is maybe one of the most important factors this board is going to have to consider due to the type of requests. And to be a little bit more specific for this committee, obligated by December 31st, 2024, that is, land purchased, designed, bid, contracted, and that contract approved by that date. If that does not occur, if this board hypothetically were to give, $500,000 to a certain project, and they miss that deadline, that money just goes right back to the treasury. So the central steering committee has been brought up, and they're going to be considering at their next meeting whether that deadline becomes artificially moved up a bit, basically to put in a safeguard to allow another use to be produced in that time period. Now, the central committee hasn't met to determine that timeline, but it may be 3 months in advance, maybe 6 months in advance, and there are all different ways to, to skin that cat. But at the end of the day, if it's a infrastructure project, it has to be really ready to go by that date, and past design all the way to contract. And the people that have been involved in that knows that is a lengthy process. And so when we get to the presentations, and also having an idea of what the market is right now in the engineering and the architectural world that these people would be going to, if a project does not currently started with an engineer or an architect, there's going to be some difficulty in getting to that finish line in time, depending on, of course, the size and scope of the project. But I think it would be fair, and I think that's one of the reasons why we have Mr. Novotny here. But I'm assuming right now that most of those engineering and architect firms are approximately, now scale of size will matter, but a decent sized project, you're probably looking at 18 months if they started designing today. So, you start doing the math, and that's assuming there isn't meetings to get to that. So, will be a very essential part when this committee is going through these requests of whether or not that can be met or not. And that's not a requirement that we can change, modify. That's what it's served to us.
I think that's why you got to have a match money component on those type of projects that are relevant. Because, if they're going to step up, they got to have that match, and that's what starts the project.
Well, and the match was the next I was going to say, because again, if there's so many moving pieces to these infrastructure projects, depending on where the individual application is in that process already, that if I would venture to say that if you do not either have, if the request that you're asking for right now, plus the money you currently have, doesn't get you over the finish line of the money you need to do the project, and or you don't have it started to be engineered yet, or it's a project that's not something that can be designed fairly quickly, And then depending on what the makeup of the board or body that's doing it, what they have to jump through to be able to approve those contracts. I mean, those are a lot of moving pieces that during the presentation, someone's going to have to be able to convince pretty readily that this is a viable project and will be completed by, be obligated by this date and then completed in 2026. And as these projects are kind of graded out, as I've said in all the other committees, at some point we're going to be dealing with differentiating between A and A- applications. I've seen an overview of the core requests, and there's a lot of good requests, and there's going to be a lot of good presentations, and these things are going to come down to making those minor differentials between things, and those are going to be very important. And some of the numbers on these projects, again, will be, all goes into that decision making of can you get to the finish line or not. Again, I'm not looking at the list, but if there's somebody who still needs to fundraise $1 million,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
that's, unless there's a very clear articulated path to that, then we're going to start running into that problem. So the reason why the Central Committee did have the overarching kind of, is there match, is there collaboration, can you meet this date, is because it may not fit like the jigsaw puzzle in every committee, but especially in this committee, that will be part of the evaluation of these projects, is whether they can actually engineer, paid for, money available. Because the other thing we obviously do not want is a $2 million project, a hypothetical $2 million project that got $500,000 from us, gets $500,000 gets contracted out by December 31st of 2024, but there's maybe not enough money to finish the project.
Yep.
I mean, so this isn't somebody wants a vehicle and you go purchase the vehicle and then that transaction's complete, and you may have some supply chain issues, but these got a lot more moving parts, and it's going to take a little bit more to really make sure that they can get to the finish line.
The other part to consider, I completely agree with Attorney McClure. There's two initial bars that I think all these proposals have to clear. One is eligibility, with the help of Madam Auditor, determining whether or not they're eligible for funds. Second is the practicability. If you, Scott, I think you're spot on. If you don't have the land rights already, if you're talking about land acquisition, if you haven't already started the design process, or you can't move through that process very quickly, chances are you're not going to be under contract by the end of 2024. The other thing I think we have to look at is some of the cost estimating in here, because as you guys know, especially during the pandemic here, we've seen material prices spike, we've seen supply chain shortages, we've seen fuel costs spike, which cause increase in construction costs. So we've got to make sure these numbers are practical, they're in line with expectations for where they are, not only where they are today, but where they're going to be in 2024 or 2020, whenever the construction period might be. So that's the other thing we have to determine is, the last thing we want is somebody's asking for $500,000, they're matching it with $250,000 of their own, so they think the project's $750,000, but it winds up being $1.25 because of material prices, fuel prices, and what do we do then? The project's not going to be a success. So I think we have to look at that aspect of these projects as well and make sure that the cost estimating is accurate within, some margin of error. This is planning level, so there's going to be some fine tuning to these numbers as the projects develop, but they've got to be realistic estimates at this point in time.
I think a point that concerns me is the project going to be viable? We can build it, but are they going to be able to get the funds to run it, to continue it? I'm throwing money down a hole, and that's one thing that really stands out with me on a few of these, that where are they going to get the money from to actually, once it's built, to run it, to continue it working?
Well, the only thing I would ask is that some of these that are on here that have a government funding a source,
Yes.
You know, why are they asking for the money when most of them are already sitting on money and have money? And I know tourism, they had some revenue loss because of bed tax and everything, that I'm very familiar with. But it wasn't no $3 million. And the last I heard, they had an HVAC system that went bad. And remember, they're their own board and their own taxing unit and their
Yes.
own attorney, and they can do whatever they want when they want, but then when they need money, they come to the mothership all the time. And here you had a $250,000 HVAC thing, and it's turned into a $3 million ask. And it's sort of troubling when you see some of this stuff. To at least me, it is. But we'll work through the committee on that, and we'll vet it, and we'll see where it all comes out at. But I'm just sort of giving a little foray to the group and some of the folks that may not know me here, what I know I'm going to be looking for from my perspective. That's just me as an elected official. So Scott, go ahead.
Again, I'm sorry to talk so much, but the last thing I will say is this: I think did you go over the process a little bit of, we're not just writing a check to a.
Yeah.
other-
Sort of.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
then I will, that's fine, I missed that part.
Can I ask a question real quick? Is there a reimbursement component to this? If they've already done some of the work after, say, a certain date in the calendar, or are we only going to obligate funds from the date forward that the project's approved? So if they've done some pre-work, and we're going to take that into consideration, hey, they've already done the pre-work, they've met with the engineers in X amount of dollars, or we're just going to say, that's your cost, we're only looking going forward?
Right, well, yes and yes.
Okay.
The expenditure period does go back. I would have to look up the exact date, but it goes back, I believe, March of last year. So you could view it that way.
Okay.
Do you
I would.
want to view it that way?
Well, I think, that's something that I'd have to think about, but I think that, you're gonna have to prove the project. You're gonna have to prove it up. And to me, it all gets down to whether you got the money or you don't have the money. And it's not only just for the construction of it, it's for the maintenance of it
There you go.
as well. And
Continue.
we've learned up here that, we have a subdivision that failed 2 months ago. It was in the paper. It was put in 20 years ago when we had a sitting commissioner on, who was a commissioner then, and it got put in. And that was 20 years ago. It's a system that should have lasted 50, 60 years. And now we have to use, that's gonna be a project that's gonna come forward in here, and we're gonna have to figure out how to put the genie back in the bottle on this whole subdivision that's 20 years old. And we got a lot of that out there. Right now. And so, I just want to make sure that everybody, this match money and everything, you're going to have to prove up what you've spent and how you're going to go about it. Because I would say some of the reason that some of these requests are here is because of the same problems we experienced at the county, is they weren't maintaining systems and they weren't doing things, and now they're in a hole and they need help, and we don't want to assess ourselves, so we're gonna, we see an opportunity here to go in and grab money, and I think it's worth it. We'll look at it, we'll weigh it, but I was gonna say, one of the things that we did a long time ago when we started out at the RDA, and we had the Regional Development Authority, we had a lot of cities and towns coming in for projects. One of the things that we kept out of it was we made the applicant pay for all engineering, because that's a soft cost, right? If you don't get the engineering done and then you bid it out and it's too expensive to do at the time, well, at least you still have the engineering that you can come back and do it again when the prices are better. So and that was one of the things that we did, and that seemed to sort of level the playing field a little bit, is that now they have to come out of pocket for the engineering, which is all up front. It's all up front. So now you're getting that commitment up front of their dollars in the engineering, and it's something that entity will always have for them down the road. So that's just another idea I'd throw out to the group to think about.
No, I think that's a great idea,
great
to make sure that they're committed
That's
to it, and,
And I would add that to add to the kind of the long list of things that I'm talking about with this deadline, if this board starts awarding to pay for engineering, so that means we haven't started or picked, that really, I think, is gonna be a red flag. You know, again, scope and size of the project will, you know, change that answer, but if it's, we need money for engineering and the project, and as we're sitting here, and when this could be awarded, you know, in the next several months, I mean, you start doing the timeline, and that starts to become real time. So, it's gonna be a totality of all those things together. Who kind of meets those requirements? You know, it's almost gonna be qualify, which we've done, you know, facially qualify, and then, okay, nuts and bolts, could you get this done? Do you have the money to get it done? And do you have the timing right to get it done? Then that's almost like the next list. And then almost go through that list of, okay, now let's go through and rank these a bit, because in this, again, in this committee especially, most of the requests are pretty significant, so.
Well, that's why I was asking. I know Vicki put her time frame out for the next several months. And I think, Scott, you and I talked about this early on, is that the concern that I have with this committee is we're looking at anywhere from 16, you know, 14 and a half, $15 million requested. And it seems like our committee has the bigger ticket items. So you can run up that fee real quick. But yet we still want to make sure that these other committees get their stuff in, right? So I'm a little concerned, should we, you know, do we wait a little bit? Do we come forward and put our ask up and then let them come back? I just want to make sure, because we're sort of at a disadvantage, because all of our projects are, you know, average 800, 900,000 apiece, where these other ones are much smaller, you know, pieces.
Well,
and
there's some significant ones in the other committees too, but your point is well taken.
we need the
You
more
have-
time, but yet we want to prove out all the other stuff before the big stuff comes in, and it's just a timing thing for me. It's not, I just want to make sure that that'll be the central committee's probably responsibility to make sure it ebbs and flows, but.
I think, I mean, just a pure suggestion would be, Vicki's done the facial, it qualifies. I think the next step of this board is to drill down enough to figure out through the application, is their best foot forward at this point in time? Is there a way to look through those applications at the next meeting and say, all right, I want to, and maybe, again, the goal being, we're not saying you're getting money, this is not a good but pass the first hurdle, can you meet the timing requirements? And if you can't, then it doesn't seem to be a whole lot of reason to be doing the presentation, because they're just not going to be able to get to that finish line and be able to start, because at some point, again, as to your point, we're going to have to pick A's and A minuses, and if you are, I'm doubting as we sit here with $50 million of requests, that if you are barely going to make it, either money-wise, timing-wise, or whatever the case may be, that is probably going to have a significant detrimental effect on your scoring level. Because, you know, whether there's 4 million of projects out of this, and, you know, et cetera. So getting down to starting to make that initial divide, and in this particular committee, that's, I think, the natural first divide.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay.
And can I just clarify something? I don't know if this is exactly what you said, but I have not signed off on every single one of these yet. Okay? I
didn't think so.
I'm throwing that out at you. I don't know if that's, I think you said that I vet it, but I don't know if you said that I'm done vetting it, you know? Because I think.
You have facially reviewed them, and for right now, they look
Yeah.
like they qualify. But you're still in process, that's all I'm saying.
yeah.
I have
I'm
some
not tying you to
questions.
it.
I have some questions that maybe only the applicant can answer.
Yeah.
And also the answer of, does the county want those?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
At what point is
Because-
the county going to be able to afford, some of these things are going to fall back a little bit on the county.
Because there might be some that I feel can only be covered under the revenue loss category,
Yeah.
quite frankly.
Yeah, that's the other tricky part, is
And that's
whether we're
why
gonna
I'm
get
not
to
saying
that or
no
not.
to anything. If you, and I don't know how everyone feels, so.
Yeah, well, the process will weigh out, it'll play out, so that's what it's here for.
One of the questions I have is regarding the, and I'm not sure if I remember this right, but on the application itself, did we ask, or have we asked these groups submitting the proposals if they have applied for and/or received any other grants or funding through the COVID money? And my eyes are drawn specifically to the tourism request, because knowing that is one of the, if not the hardest hit industry, I would assume the money's fallen from the sky to them, and if it is, have they applied? How much have they received? All getting back to that financial need sort of thing, which, I'll tell you, the county itself has needs that would far exceed all of this money. And so if we're going out to other governmental agencies or outside entities to grant, money for their particular project, I mean, it absolutely has to be 100% justifiable, and we have to have the oversight to make sure that the work is done and done right, and that they also haven't had opportunities or received funding from other sources. So that financial piece to me is going to be for the groups outside of Porter County government, which I'm intimately aware of. But for outside groups, to really do a full financial review to determine need, I think would be pretty critical, at least from my perspective.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
The disproportionately impacted populations portion of SLFRF, or is there any concern around that as far as?
Disproportionately impacted communities?
Yeah, yeah.
Good question.
That is a specific area of the final rule, and that includes the low-income neighborhoods as well as qualified census tracts. We have, and tribal governments and U.S. territories. We do have a qualified census tract here in Porter County, and it is located basically right here. It's bounded, I believe it's Sturkey or Silhavy on the east, Lincoln Way on the north, 30 on the south, and Hayes Leonard on the west.
So are any of these projects in that area where they take a precedence over some of the other stuff?
Not in your committee, no.
Okay.
Actually, I believe
Do we
there's
have one?
actually,
In the county, do we have one of those disadvantaged projects?
Not in the area that
Okay.
Speak
Madam
up.
Auditor is
But
describing.
another area,
Correct.
because there's another area that's in, what, South Haven?
I thought that portion, yeah, I mean, maybe I stand corrected that portions of South Haven are not
well,
in that low income.
right, okay, now, not to complicate it.
Yes.
But we
Certainly make
are
let's complicate it.
allowed to identify other disproportionately impacted areas, but if we go that route, we have to
I
have the
gotcha.
statistics.
Okay.
And I, quite frankly, was surprised in not seeing on the census map certain other areas
Sure,
of our county.
okay.
I'd say keep it simple.
Right.
Yeah.
We could identify those other areas. And I think that we could put forth that argument.
Absolutely.
Now, the disproportionately impacted areas do allow additional uses of the monies, like replacement of lead pipes. I haven't spent I was spending a lot of time on this because we did have a project in the QCT. But lately, we haven't been focused on that. There is one application in another subcommittee that is in the QCT. So at that level, they don't even have to prove that they were negatively harmed. It's already presumed that they were. Also, tourism industries are presumed to have been negatively impacted.
They were.
Now, yeah, I know. So they don't have to really prove financial, but see, even though you may have like the tourism here, again, what motivated me in assigning these projects were what is the project? Not so much how they fit into the final rule, even though that's very, very important. What did the commissioners want these different boards to look at? And, some of these assignments, it could be argued, should be in a different area. You have some nonprofits here. that maybe should they be in the nonprofit, but again, what's their project? And these projects are stormwater or drainage or wetland conservation projects, which really fall into this area under the final rule. So it's, you know, it's no right or wrong answer, but yes, we do have disproportionately impacted, and there is added flexibility for those areas.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the group? We talked about a lot here. Do we open it up for public comment now at this time? We're going to open it up for public comment.
And then the other thing, we have to schedule our next meeting.
Oh, yeah.
And how you want to proceed. Do you want me to tell you how other groups or subcommittees are proceeding? Okay, one, the COVID response, which is more along like your line, you know. They're going to hear presentations, but they think they can get it all done in one day because they have more projects than you do, but I think fewer applicants because of multiple. There's another one that's going to be cutting down their list because they have 25 or 26 projects. They're going to make a first cut based on the strength of the application, and then they're going to hear presentations. And the other one is going to hear presentations.
I think what I've been thinking about that, and since I'll throw it out to the group, what I would think, looking at our list here, I think what I'd like to do is the next meeting that we look at all the Porter County government applicants and let them come forward. Now, in the storm drainage there for Porter County, storm drainage, they have 6 million in there, but that's like 4 or 5 projects. So we need to present
six projects.
Yeah, so we need to present them, get them on the board, take you through them from an engineering perspective. So it's going to take a little more time for each one to go through. It's like a plan commission almost. So what I was thinking is just breaking them up into 2 groups and do the government ones first and then all the other ones on our second meeting. And by then, we've gone through all the applicants and have heard everybody at that point. That's just an idea. Or we could do it flip-flop the other way. I don't really care. It's up to you.
So I think that's a great idea. We can start with them and then move on to the next group after that.
Yeah, my only suggestion would be is if you want to look at the list at the next meeting to determine if someone clearly can't meet the finish line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be, and then make that determination. And if everyone meets that finish line, then yeah, I think that scheduling sounds good. Or at least, again, facially can meet that deadline.
Okay.
But that would be either or.
Is that something that they would have to kind of show us whether they have the ability to meet that deadline? So we would still have to have a presentation, correct? Or are you saying to go through their plan?
Well, I think I'm assuming their application is their best foot forward to begin with. We have this, we got this funding, we've got this timeline, because we want to build this. I mean, again, we're just hearing them all. It's up to the board, frankly, but that's.
Yeah, I mean, up to the board members, how much homework you guys want to do. I'm more than happy to look through, the proposals and, craft some questions based on timeline information that they presented within there, just for consideration by the board members.
Yeah.
Or the committee members.
Yeah, I think when we put our agenda out, we'll put on there the ones that we're going to talk about, because we need to let the people who are the applicants to come, they have to be here too.
Right.
So I think if we put our agenda together, we'll put which ones we want on there. And even if we think we have more time, we'll throw a couple of the other ones on there and we'll try to knock out as many as we can. I just don't want the meetings to turn into marathons, because after an hour and a half of this stuff, you start going, I mean, it's a lot to look at.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just want to make sure we're up on our game there when we're doing it. So it's just a thought.
And I'm sure the committee members who are serving on another committee also appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because you guys are going to be going to a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
So potentially 2 meetings of presentations.
Yep.
And then 1 meeting where we make some decisions.
Yep, make it figured out. So that's about 3 meetings for this group. And if we need to have another one and something happens, we'll redirect and we'll ram at it again. That's
Exactly.
all you got to do, right?
Yep.
So
So
No,
easy
I'm-
dates.
I'm excited. Looking forward to working with our citizens here. It's going to be a good process, so we'll see how it works.
Just schedule some meeting times because
Yeah.
our calendar is like very, very tight. What is your preference? You know, afternoons, evenings?
Per the steering committee, you must have at least one evening or weekend meeting.
Now, there's nothing really available during the evenings next week unless you want to do a Friday evening. Please don't.
That's what I like to do, is
Yeah.
talk about stormwater on Friday nights. Fun.
Friday daytime is wide open,
Friday day. That would be the 22nd.
correct?
It's Earth Day. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to do morning or afternoon?
It's up to the group.
I'm wide open.
The morning's better for me on that day. Morning.
So
10?
10 on the.
10 work, guys?
Yes.
Second,
April 22nd.
okay. and
At
let's
10
see
o'clock?
what's the next week. We are open the 26th in the evening, if that would work for you.
I'm open.
That actually works for me.
Works for me.
April 26th?
26th at 5.
26th at 5?
We didn't do
Yeah.
that day.
Fine.
We didn't do that day.
I will not, I can't be here that day,
Oh, okay.
but I don't
Vicky
need to.
can't be here that day.
On the 26th?
Yeah.
Correct.
Oh,
The
sorry.
whole week is gone.
Yeah, but she
I
does-
don't need to be here.
she does
I'm not a
this-
voting member.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you do a lot of advising.
Well, she'll watch the video, no doubt.
3 times.
Yeah, there we go. That's a spirit.
So you looked at that before.
April 26th.
No, I'm not going to
5
promise
o'clock.
that. No, I-
So the 26th at
5 o'clock.
26th at
5 o'clock.
Okay, and then, you know, we probably, when we get to that.
Well, can we go from there? We might,
Yeah, that following week is, well, no, the following week, the only evening open that week is election day. You don't want to do anything in here that evening. And the evenings, the rest of that week are tied up, but again, Friday is wide open.
Well, I think that gives us, oh, we're not doing the 26th?
Yeah, I know, but I'm thinking of the third meeting where you meet to make your.
I think what I'd like to do is get through the first 2
Yes.
meetings before we
Yep.
do the third meeting, yeah.
Okay.
Because I want to see how this goes. I mean, I set a bunch of meetings out there. This is going to ebb and flow, I think, and I just want to make sure we're not getting way far out there too, you know.
Yes, yeah.
We can rein it in.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like this group's pretty flexible, so we can make it go.
Yes.
And then, as far as dividing up who's going to present when, would it be helpful, Mike, for the ones that you're going to dig into and get some good questions for them to answer, to have you be that second meeting on the 26th, perhaps?
I would ask, I would ask that. There's very little, a little bit amount of turnaround time between now and the next meeting
Right.
to kind of dive into these and prepare a little report for you. I mean, happy to do
And then
that.
everything else can be on the 22nd.
Okay, so we'll
Makes sense.
do the first meeting with everybody else.
Yeah.
And then the county would be the second meeting.
No, the opposite, I believe. You want yours to be the second.
I'm happy to do, look, I'm happy to do either one. Just realize, that the next meeting, the 19th, is
A week away.
A week away.
So do the county ones on the 22nd?
26th, and do
Oh.
the other ones on the 22nd.
I'm sorry, 22nd, the 22nd. Yeah, 22nd, 26th. Those are the next 2 meeting dates. So,
22nd is the non-Porter County government ones.
Yep.
Okay.
yes,
And
let's
we'll
do
give
that.
him the 26th. So the 22nd so that the applicants that are non-county related. would go.
Non-county government,
Yeah.
yep.
And then
entities.
we may throw waste and recycling and tourism on that one too.
Balance it out.
Yeah.
On what date?
On the 22nd.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of it's gonna be the county's projects. There's 6 of them, and they're big projects. I mean, it's gonna take a
Right.
while for everybody to take them through, so, yes.
Can I
ma'am.
clarify, what are the county projects that we're talking about? Because the way I subdivided it was between, like, the building projects, based on how I'm viewing the final rule, and then the water projects, based on how I'm viewing. But there's a county project in the water projects, that's stormwater.
There's.
Move the
there's-
stormwater up.
There's 6 projects in that dollar
I'm
amount,
sorry, okay.
right?
I thought you were talking about 6 county projects.
No, I'm just,
You're talking 6 stormwater projects, which are county projects.
right.
And then I'm kind of viewing, well, okay, never mind.
Would it be
because
okay if we
It
just-
gets complicated.
Would it be okay if we said which ones it would be at?
Yes,
the
let's
next?
do that.
Okay.
So she can,
Well, she doesn't have, what she's asking is she doesn't have the ones for the county the 6 projects. They're not listed.
Right, and for me, I guess I don't know which ones are actually considered
Oh,
Oakland County.
county
Yeah.
government
You know what?
entities, got it.
Yes.
Here's
going
what
to
we'll
Porter
do.
County AG,
You
I
guys,
think.
when we do the agenda, we'll put the ones on there on the agenda.
Okay.
Okay.
I have been doing the agendas.
Well, I'll get you the names of the ones that we can do it for.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm doing it myself. I'm saying that we gotta get you the list here and then we can prepare an agenda, because we need to post the agenda too, so people know
Why did these
what we're gonna be
all
talking about, right?
Right.
So,
And also, I've been reaching out to the presenters to tell them that these are the dates. And so the earlier the better to tell them, so that they can plan.
I think what Mike and I will do is we'll huddle up quick,
Okay.
and we'll get you the names of our projects, and then we'll look at the other ones we want to do, and then we'll get them to you, and you can get that agenda out, and then the rest would be on the next agenda.
Okay, very good.
How's that sound? Mike, we'll huddle up and get those projects together then. Oh, now let's move to the public comment section of this. We're going to open it up for public hearing. Wall. Oh, we got someone else here.
I just have a quick question. The 53 million, I'm sorry to...
You have to go up to the mic, please.
I just want to know if these projects are listed on the website yet. Are they outlined on the website now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Robin Lane, 258 High Street. So Vicki, forgive me if this was already talked about. If a project gets picked and money is given to for engineering and any of this pre-planning, and that project doesn't actually being able to be finished, or it has issues with the deadline, like Scott was saying, what happens to the money that has already been spent? Does that go to the actual company that was submitting to pay, or do we, as the county, still have to pay for that? I'm just trying to, because I didn't actually understand exactly if a project do you understand what does this make sense?
Yeah.
Well, the way I understood it is that discussion was that the group would pay for the engineering themselves.
Okay, so is that what we're finally decided on?
Well,
'Cause-
it's part of the match.
Right.
It's part of the matching funds that they would have to come up with to do, so what we say is, okay, you're gonna come up with your match, and we suggest that your match be part of your match be your engineering. You can stipulate as to the things that you want as part of your match. So we would have to probably come up with that. And then if they don't meet the project, and the money gets kicked back, it goes to the federal government. It goes back
Right.
to the federal
Right.
government. Unless we have the time to substitute something in between, but my guess is you're probably gonna be getting to the end of the rope, I would think.
Yeah, because this is just something like a can of worms, it sounds like. I mean, because,
It
and I'm
is.
just trying to, for my own, mind.
So let's say this group decides we do want to spend money on engineering, but then the second part never happens.
Right.
So we spend part of our federal grant on engineering for a project. What's that saying? The road that goes nowhere, the
Yeah,
bridge that went
the
nowhere?
bridge to nowhere.
Right. Well,
So,
that was a legitimate expense. A vendor did service, a vendor got paid, from my mind. But I don't want to see that happen. I think that's
Right. See, we can't-
wrong.
that's
I think
right.
the spirit of the funds are to complete
Exactly,
projects.
and I
That's
think that that
right.
is going to
Think.
be the goal of this committee and the county. We don't want to spend money for a partial project or something that's so unrealistic or only like halfway built.
I mean, what I'm
We've
saying
seen
is
all
there
those horror
guidelines
stories.
saying if something like that were to happen, that the
No.
people that submit it then have to be held responsible for, you know, the funds? Or is that something that just would go back to we would
Well-
just eat the funds? Honestly, this is just
Conceivably,
something I'm curious
The agreement
about.
that we come up with could stipulate terms like that. If this project isn't done,
Right, I
but
mean-
we spend that money, you have to reimburse us or something like that. Now, enforcement-wise, that might be a different legal issue, but it's,
I think.
I mean, it might weed
Commissioner-
out some people that just have like, you know, how serious they are, but, I mean, again, that was just, like, I just got confused, so I was trying to get some clarity on the matter.
But that's why I think of the options that we talked about, direct invoicing, reimbursement, or advance, like the reimbursement option, to me, is the most protective of the county's money, because we could say only when the project's completed are you eligible for that reimbursement.
And met the standards and spent it
Correct.
correctly. Yeah.
But that's, I don't think anything's necessarily been determined here, but I think there's been a lot of good ideas, and I think that's an important
I think,
topic to consider
Commissioner
as we
Good, didn't you
award
say
or
that-
select projects for award.
Didn't you say at one point, if they were just now starting to get their engineering and all of that together, that there's no way that it would be completed?
Well, it's gonna depend on the type of engineering too, because, if you're doing water restoration or wetlands restoration, the amount of engineering that's probably gonna be needed there may not be as complicated as a water line or a sewer line or a big storm retention. So you could have some projects that could take, it could take a couple, year and a half to get the engineering done. All these engineering firms on the big projects, they're just swamped right now. But, it's gonna depend on the work and,
Do we need to approve a criteria that we're going to be judging these against? I mean, is that something we need to do as a body first?
yeah, and
before
I
we
think
start
that's where
hearing?
Mike will be coming up saying, hey, they want this, they got till 25.
I don't know, do you guys have like a checklist you're good at? Well, you should have a you'll have a checklist.
Yeah, I think our engineering department up there has a whole checklist and the process that we'll be, putting into that meat grinder for our stuff.
Yeah, I think once, and, to carry on some of the conversation we've had already, there's the eligibility determination, there's the practicability determination. Can this project be completed by the
Right.
deadline? If those hurdles are cleared, then I think we get into that prioritization and
Right.
ranking. And I'll submit to you guys, we use a series of 12 criteria
Okay, so
already.
the defined criteria. we can-
And it doesn't necessarily have to be used by this committee, but I'll submit it
It's
to
best
you
practices.
Yes, that's fine.
for your consideration.
No, I think that's smart,
practices.
definitely. People can say, oh, yeah, you judge us fairly on this criteria.
Impact
Yeah.
to the county, how many people are served by it, how many people benefit,
Yeah.
And
things
I
like
think that's
that.
another value of having Mike as a non-voting member on the committee, is when we look at a project, he's gonna be able to determine too whether they can make it and make it all work because of being in the industry and dealing with it every day. So we're gonna have some guidance there to help us with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yep. Come on up, name, address.
Harry Brown, 203 Harrison, Valpo. I'm here for Isaac Walton, Porter County. I heard 3 different dates, the 19th, the 22nd, and the 26th. Is the 19th out?
Sorry, I misspoke. The 19th was never under it's the 22nd, the 26th.
It went, it came and it went. Okay, that's the same way I heard it, same way I heard it. 22nd is at what time of the day?
10 o'clock.
And you're not doing the county people then? When they're all available during the day? You're making the outside people, who have people that work and everything, come at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Friday before a holiday? It's still a holiday weekend for a lot of people. I don't understand that. 5 o'clock is still tough for a lot of people working. Originally, you had this meeting for 6:30, and then it changed to 10 o'clock and changed to 1 o'clock. So I had a lot of people I was trying to tell, and I finally said, I'll be there, I'll find out what's going on. If you're having a public meeting, you need to make it later than 5 o'clock for people that are working, that can't get off. That's all I'm asking. It's a simple request.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can't make either the 22nd or the 26th, and I have people coming from out of town. And I am trying to get a match, and we're trying to get all their technical data ready, so I hope we're not on the list for either date. So if you can keep that in consideration, other groups might have the same thing. I can't imagine you're going to do 40 people, 40 groups on the 22nd. You must have some sort of
We
criteria.
didn't say we were doing 40 people.
So you're going to pick out some people out of the...
No, we said we're gonna split our list that we have up here. It's not 40 people. I don't know where you're getting
Well,
that from.
you had...
She talked about
63
another committee
requests.
that had a bunch of requests, but that's not this committee.
I thought you had 63 requests for
Yes, but
53
not-
million. How many to this committee? I never heard how many.
Of course, Isaac Walton.
Only 13 to this
Yes,
committee.
Yeah, see right
Never heard
here,
that figure.
right there.
That makes a hell of a lot more sense.
Well, that
Okay?
figure
You know, we try.
And we did
We
not,
try up
we
here.
did not fill out all our details on the tech yet, and we're still scrambling for that. And we're trying to get it done this weekend. So if you're asking for us to be on the 22nd, I was hoping to be for that, and I won't be for that. And I won't have my other people ready for a Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning. They
All
will.
right, we have your, we'll look at the agenda. If we have to throw it on the 26th, we'll throw you on the 26th then.
And that's at 5 o'clock still.
Yes, as of right now, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll let my people know.
Thank you. Anybody else?
And if you could give us a little more background, we didn't hear about Mr. Hazard and Mr. Sweetemeyer, what their backgrounds were. I wasn't at a commissioners meeting where they talked about why they were chosen to be citizen members here. I have no idea. I assume they know building projects, and they know, that maybe, I have no idea what their background are. It wasn't in the paper. I missed it in the information that's in the website. Just a brief introduction to those of us that are blind on this, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I totally agree about this engineering thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree about your thing about the engineering. Why?
So why don't we?
Why should a county pay for
When we
engineering?
get done with the public
Okay.
hearing, we'll open it back up, and then you guys can
Okay, absolutely.
embellish about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, that's always fun.
Yeah. Anybody else? With that, the public hearing closed. Now we'll talk to our two citizens advisory people, and we'll start with you, James.
Okay, my name's James Hazard. I'm from Portage. My background was military, where I was an engineer and supervised construction and bridge building in Afghanistan. Back in Portage, I've been on the Plan Commission for several years, the Development Review Committee for several years, the Board of Zoning Appeals for many years as well, and I've also built projects myself, and and I was on the Utility Service Board for several years as well.
All in Portage.
Yes.
Curtis Strohmeyer, I live here in Valpo. Background, I've been a school superintendent for 7 years, not currently, but I was, so I've worked with projects dealing with construction around school buildings, as far as also working with small communities, as far as everything from sidewalks to trails. I was a director of technology for 10 years, so I worked with broadband, I've worked with security, I've worked with all those options as well. My current role, I work with a company where I basically, I do research around federal funding and grants, so I study what funding is available for organization to utilize and how it can be utilized properly.
Both clearly qualified, and we certainly appreciate your participation.
James is the commissioner's appointment. He is the council appointment.
Okay.
Right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I just submitted applications.
You guys pick him. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we really had a nice outpouring of people that came forward and put their names up, and I thought we were very blessed with the people that we got to pick from our committees, so that's what I feel. Anyway.
Thank you.
So thank
happy to
you
be
for
here.
participating, gentlemen.
thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, we are back here on the 22nd, and we're off and rolling, and this board is in recess.